Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I am going to be playing with the Mushroom Garden layering stencil from Altenew. It was my favorite product from the September release that Altenew had. If you did not know, I was or am a guest designer for Altenew this month, and that was like the one product I was like, oh yeah, I love this. And it actually surprised me because I'm not a huge fan of mushrooms and like mushroom imagery, but that changed me. All right, so all I'm doing here is just lining up some different inks. I have a mix of crisp dye inks by Altenew as well as their fresh dye inks. And then I have one or two pink fresh inks mixed in here, but I think I'm only going to use that one red candied apple because I don't have a dark Altenew ink that will blend for this. And I am inspired by the colors from the Altenew Inspiration Challenge for the month. The colors are definitely hitting on fall, but I took more of a, I guess, a lighter approach to those tones. I wanted to work with what I had. So there we have it. I just have some smaller blending brushes that I am going to use in conjunction with a few of my little finger daubers, because the spaces that you have to fill with ink here are really small in some areas, especially on the stencil with all the detail. It's pretty small. So this is just stencil number 1, and I have it laid over some 5.5 by 8.5 Hammermill cardstock. I am using the Cherry Sweet little mini ink cube that is the fresh dye ink line by Altenew, and I am just putting that all over, even on areas I didn't intentionally mean to add it to, which includes the bottom of some of those mushrooms. But I am trying to concentrate the ink to one side of the mushrooms, just to add some color variation in there. And I'm not gonna lie, inking this up did take a bit of time because you have to just make sure you don't skip spaces. And as you can see, I'm like all over the place, and I do end up skipping places and have to go back. But I am going to speed up the ink blending footage just so you can, get through the video. So here is how my first layer is looking. And before I remove that stencil, I just use my pencil to make a little guide for me to align these stencils up, because of course I wasn't thinking and did not have anything to align the corners to. So I just drew a little line with my pencil so I know where my stencil should align, although there are those laser marks in the stencil that help you see where it should align. But still, I wanted to have a little bit of a guide for myself. Alright, so for this layer, which is stencil number 2, I'm using the Sun-Kissed Crisp Dye Ink, and I am first focusing on the underside of those mushrooms and trying to make sure that there is some areas that have more variation in color than others to mimic shadowing. So yeah, so I'm going in with that. Again, I'm using my smaller ink blending brushes just because these are smaller spaces to fill. I'm using that same color on the bottom of the mushrooms as well. Again, trying to create my shadows and variation of colors, but it's all one ink that I am using. So then I'm going to go in with Mango Smoothie and just ink those up again, making sure my brush hits one side a little more intense than the other side of those small areas. So there we have my second layer done, and you can see how the shadowing effect is looking with trying to focus my ink on one side of the stencil. But now I am adding that detail layer, which is stencil number 3, and this makes all of the little dots and shadow areas on the tops of the mushrooms. You add in all of the branches for the leaves and the different like twigs and stuff. So I am now using the candied apple again, and I'm just going over the shadow areas as well as some of those spots heavier than I did before. And you can see this is a deeper red, especially when you add more ink. So that's just what I'm going to use there. Again, we are going for that fall tone of the card, so I'm using reds and oranges and peaches and some yellows. Next up, I am going to use a small brush to do all of the branches, and I'm using a dark chocolate crisp dye ink by Altenew for that. So I'm going to use the Peach Parfait crisp dye ink and color in the stems for those larger leaf or branch gatherings, I guess you can say, the greenery that is supposed to be mixed in with these mushrooms. So once that is pretty much finished, I see all of the ink just sitting on top of the stencil, and those little dots, there's like groups of 3 dots. I just choose to take my ink blender and I just use all of the residual ink from on top of the stencil and kind of mix it to go inside of those little 3 dots. Once I realized that wasn't really getting the job done, I just grabbed the Rouge Crisp dye ink and I went over those little spots. So again, there may be slight color variations in how those little dots look, but I mean, hey. So now we have the reveal with all of the detail, and this is how we are looking. All that's left is adding some leaves to those empty branches and stems, and so now it's time to add some color to those leaves that are bare. So I'm going to go in with a tiny brush in the Tangerine Dream, and I'm going to add that pop of color along there. I will be using the lemonade stand for the stalk of the mushrooms, as well as the detail for the underside of the mushroom caps. So now for the big reveal. This is how my mushroom garden layering stencil has turned out. I love it. I love how all these colors are just beautiful and speak fall. They just scream fall. So it's easy. It just takes some time, especially figuring out if you want different areas, different colors. But this is what I came up with. Here I'm going back in, and some of those stalks of my mushrooms, they just aren't, they're missing something. So I'm going in with this fresh dye ink, and I am adding more of this like peachy tone to those thicker stalks, just to make everything kind of go together better. So this is what we're left with. I think it is absolutely gorgeous. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut this down and add a sentiment, which I already have on hand, and this is from the Mushroom Greetings. It's one I already had on hand. The Mushroom Greetings set comes with a stamp as well as a die, and this one says "Love You Mush." It is stamped and then heat embossed using some gilded embossing powder from Bruce Monroe, which is like my favorite. But yeah, so I'm gonna add that on. Just went ahead and went in with my Jelly Roll pen to add some highlights, some little white specks here and there on these mushrooms, just to add a bit of interest and a pop. So the cardstock that I chose was just this deeper, almost wine cardstock that I had on hand. If I can find the name for it, I'll link it down below, but I'm pretty sure it's from like a Michael's assorted pack. I cut my panel down to 4 5 1/4, and then I just have an A2 matte in that colored cardstock. Here I am taking a 3/4 inch strip, and I am going to have my sentiment popped up on that. To pop up my sentiment, I am just using some craft foam with double-sided adhesive on both sides, and I just die cut that out using the same die that I die cut the sentiment out of, and just back to my sentiment to pop it up. Now that my sentiment is in place, I just add a few gems around it, and there we have this beautiful card. Alright guys, so here is the card. Tell me what you think. I do have a blog post up sharing this beautiful card, as well as a post over on Instagram, so you can head on over and like that if you like this card. All of the links to the products will be found down below. That's all I have, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.